and welcome to period 4. We're going to go through two slides, actually, one section very quickly, so you have some idea of how to complete a Janus figure. So when you come to take your test on either Monday or Tuesday, I'm going to hand out what's called it's just a blank sheet, actually. Mine is all filled in, but it's called a Janus figure. And if you know anything about what a Janus figure or a Janus is, it's this kind of it's a Roman god of duality. Like, we have two sides to us. We're kind of two-faced. So what I want you to do for the Janus figure is look at how Thomas Jefferson was both democratic in his ideals, which means he was pro-state, he was pro-farmer, weak central government, strong state governments. But what he actually did in his time as president to show that he was not exactly Jeffersonian, as we sometimes call it, and how he went against those ideals. So that's what we're really going to talk about today. If you notice that period 4 runs from 1800 to 1848. It starts in what we call the Jefferson Revolution. We'll talk about what that word revolution means again at this election of 1800, and it goes all the way up to the Mexican-American War. Period 4 is a really heavy chapter, but you can tell what we're leading up to. If you know that the Civil War began in 1865, this is all the tension. This is all the things that are going to build up to the Civil War. And we look at the Civil War as kind of the turning point in American history. Everything up to the Civil War and everything after the Civil War. In fact, when, I hope, you take this exam in May, you will actually get 6 college credits, 2 credits worth, 2 classes worth of credit, because most colleges will divide their courses into early American history and later American history. So when you pass, which you will, you're going to get 6 credits, which is a lot, because most courses are not as comprehensive as ours are. And so pat yourselves on the back for really doing a great job of getting through so much information. So let's get to it. The nation transformed to a more participatory democracy, and it was achieved by expanding suffrage, and suffrage is voting rights, based on property ownership to one based on voting by all adult white men. And it was accompanied by the growth of political parties. When we talked about the impact of the revolution, really the only people who probably benefited were poor whites, maybe religious minorities, because women still did not have suffrage rights, Native Americans did not have suffrage rights, enslaved people were, beyond suffrage rights. They didn't even have their own freedom. So we saw some increase in democracy, but definitely not completely. In the early 1800s, national political parties continued to debate issues such as the tariff, powers of the federal government, and the relationship with European powers. Exactly what George Washington warned us about. Don't dip into these kind of issues. This is what we're dealing with right away. So the election of 1800 is sometimes known as the Revolution of 1800. Now, if you think about what a revolution is, and we just went through the Revolutionary War, if you think about what a revolution is, it's a complete change. It's usually over a long period of time, and oftentimes it might be accompanied by violence. Well, the election of 1800 was really kind of a bloodless transmission of power. The transfer of power was not, did not cause violence and tension the way other revolutions might, but it really did kind of change the face of how American democracy was going. But I do have to show you this video. I hope it works when I open it, because it's so accurate today. I'm actually really tired. Oh, there's a bell. I'm really tired of seeing political ads already, but this is nothing new. Let's see if this works.
This is Mongolia, and we are Nada. The only world who's created a premium 100% cashmere
some political watchers are saying this could be the nastiest, most negative election season of all time.
This campaign season seems like candidates have taken dirty to a whole new level.
When pundits start shouting and politicians start calling each other's names, it can seem like a return to civility is not possible. Like the very idea is a relic of some bygone era.
John Adams is a blind, bald, crippled, toothless man who wants to start a war with France. While he's not busy importing mistresses from Europe, he's trying to marry one of his sons to a daughter of King George. Haven't we had enough monarchy in America?
I'm Thomas Jefferson, and I approve this message because John Adams is a hideous, hermaphroditical character with neither the force and firmness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman.
If Thomas Jefferson wins, murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The air will be rent with the cries of the distressed. The soil will be soaked with blood and the nation black with crimes. Are you prepared to see your dwellings in flames, female chastity violated, children writhing on a pike?
I'm John Adams, and I approve this message because Jefferson is the son of a half-breed Indian squaw raised on hoe cakes, and Hamilton is a Creole bastard brat of a Scotch peddler.
The nastiest, most negative election.
Candidates have taken dirty to a whole new
It can
level.
seem like a return to civility is not possible.
All right, so you get the idea. This was nothing new. When we have the election of 1800. When we had the election of 1800, the campaigns were just as brutal, just as vicious. Those were actually words that both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams used. Well, John Adams, tried, and it backfired, tried to use the Alien and Sedition Acts to get himself reelected and kind of quash any dissenting voices against him. It didn't work, and Thomas Jefferson is elected to be the president. So now we have the first party system. If you notice this handout that I have here, before the party system, we essentially had, what we called the Federalists, and then we had the Anti-Federalists. Well, the first party system comes out after Washington leaves office, which he absolutely said don't form political parties, but they did. They didn't listen. And so now we have Republicans and Federalists, Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. Republicans were against tariffs. They wanted little federal power. They wanted to have strong relations with France. The Federalists definitely wanted tariffs. They wanted more centralized power in the government. They wanted a stronger relationship with Britain. And then it goes on to the era of good feelings. Then we have the second party system, the third party system, fourth, fifth, and sixth. So I'll also show you this graphic that I have. It's up in my room. I'm sure you probably looked at it. But we'll talk about the party system here in a little bit. Really what I want to mostly get through with you today is the Louisiana Purchase. Now this was, if you see the Twitter feed there, Thomas Jefferson the night before the Louisiana Purchase, 1803. He's going to make a big boy purchase tomorrow. This was the largest land deal that America had ever made. In fact, it was next to Alaska, probably one of the most brilliant decisions we ever made in terms of gaining territory. However, what's interesting is that Thomas Jefferson, just years before, had basically said, remember what we talked about the elastic clause and when the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions were made? He said, the president actually didn't have the power to do that. The president didn't have the explicit power to make a purchase like that. Yet when it was time for him to do this, and he kind of had to act on a dime, the offer was on the table. Robert Livingston was the guy who kind of negotiated it, and it was like, we have to act now and we have to do this fast. We have to make sure that Spain or another country is not going to try to come in and swipe this away. And so when we bought the Louisiana Purchase, Jefferson had to justify how he could do that in the name of the American government when just, previous to that, he would have said like he didn't have that kind of power. But he did kind of modify his strict constructionist views. The 12th Amendment was how we separated the vice president and the presidential elections. You can look that up when we get it to the amendments. You'll definitely learn it, so it's not quite so important. The war with Tripoli, the Chesapeake Leopard affair, and the Embargo Act, these are all things that you'll find out when you do your Janus figure, which will look like this. So you'll put some of those ideas on. So I'm not going to go through those right now. You'll find out about them. The Non-Intercourse Act, I think actually that might come up as well. Macon's Bill number 2, this was just another, it forbade French warships to be coming into, forbade French and British warships from entering U.S. ports. So it kind of put a stop on trade. The war hawks. Now here are the two that I wanted to point out. The guy on top is John Calhoun. Now we're going to start talking about John Calhoun, and it feels like we're going to talk about John Calhoun until like the day we end this course. I swear John Calhoun is around forever. But so is this guy named Henry Clay, and he's the guy on the bottom. So these two were known as war hawks, where they were really pushing for war. When we saw some of these problems like the Chesapeake Leopard affair and some of these other embargo acts, there were a lot of people pushing for war to go into war again, and they were known as war hawks. Well, eventually we are going to get into the War of 1812, which was, I mean, honestly, you should just shake your head and be like, what? Why? What was it? Huh? The War of 1812 was literally the stupidest war we could have ever declared. Watch that short video. It was really all about, remember at the end of the Revolutionary War and the Treaty of Paris, when British were supposed to get out of all of really America, and they stayed around in those forts, especially in the Ohio River Valley? That was one of the big issues. Other issues was something called impressment, which you'll hear about in this video. Impressment is when you are forcing people to join into, especially the Navy. You impress the sailors and you make them become part of your military. That's happening. And so the War of 1812 was really kind of one of these, this is a political and diplomatic nightmare. What we definitely know about the War of 1812 is this is when our White House got burned, and so now the White House that we know is what was built after the War of 1812. We're going to skip the Federalists and the Hartford Convention. What we are going to talk about is the Treaty of Ghent. Ghent was in Belgium, and that essentially ended the War of 1812. The Second Bank of the U.S., this was Jefferson vetoed it. Jefferson did not want a Bank of the United States. And so when he vetoes the Second Bank of the United States, basically he's saying that it was unconstitutional. The First Bank of the United States, because he was against Hamilton, that was unconstitutional. And any lending that was done should be considered null and void. Well, this really brought about a lot of kind of unregulated market economy, and it had this, we kept going into these cycles of up and down in our economy because we didn't have really any sort of uniformity in trade and tariffs and market regulation. And the last thing that I really need to just get to is the era of good feelings. Now, sometimes we talk about the War of 1812 and we call it Mr. Madison's War. After Madison becomes president, we go through this relatively easy period in American politics where nobody is really fighting. There's even the sides, the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists start to really kind of come together. The Federalists are starting to kind of whittle away, fizzle away, and so they'll eventually identify themselves as another name, pretty much the same ideology. But for a while we had this era of good feelings, and so this is the slide that I was telling you about. You've probably seen this in my room, and I did post this infographic on Haiku as well. If you can see this line right here, this kind of gray line, this is during Monroe's presidency, and it was known as the era of good feelings because life was okay. It was there was not a lot of division, and you can see how this side and this side are coming together. So I'd urge you to kind of look at that a little bit more and look at what the ideology is and how it was changing, who was part of where they fell on each side of the spectrum. Right down the middle is what's considered the neutral in the middle, and then if you're on one side or the other. So that's it for the day. You will be working on that Janus figure, and that will be due by Wednesday. And so if you have any questions, that'll be due on Thursday or Friday, I should say. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. Talk to you later. Bye.